Hi guys, now welcome to our first class on Othello. So remember that we have two classes every week on Wednesday at 9 a.m. and Thursday at 11 a.m. So you're watching these particular videos for the first time at that designated time. But remember, you can watch them as many times as you want after that, and you can stop and start whatever you need to do. Okay, so today we're just going to focus on the setting and the characters when it comes to the tragedy Othello. Then tomorrow, that's Thursday's class, what I'm going to get you to do is to read through Act 1, Scene 1. Now, you can find this on a free Shakespeare app. Okay, so it's that one there. So just click on that. You have a list then of all of his plays and poems. Okay, so you just scroll down until you come to Othello. Hope there's not too much of a glare there. Okay, Othello. And you will see then that you get a scene breakdown, so you can actually get a summary of each particular scene. You get a list of the characters, and then you get the full play, the script as such. Okay, so you'll see then Act 1, Scene 1, and you can scroll through, you can just read through it. So if you just have a quick read through of that now, you don't necessarily have to read all of it for Thursday, but just have a look at the first part and maybe finish it then for next week. So today we're going to look at context and background. And then obviously on Thursday then we're going to have a look at Act 1, Scene 1. And remember, when it comes to the assessment or the exam, you will be given an extract from the play and then you will have to interpret it. You will also, of course, have to answer questions then on plot, character, language, theme, imagery. Okay, different aspects there. Okay, so Othello, the play itself. Obviously, of course, we have the tragic hero. So what is a tragedy? Remember, we looked at that before. So the idea, of course, that you have a tragic hero, the main character or the protagonist, who has a fatal flaw. So he's essentially a decent man who is compromised by one flaw, which undermines all of his positive traits or characteristics. So remember, of course, for King Lear then, it was pride. For Hamlet, it was procrastination. For Macbeth, it was ambition or avarice. So for Othello, of course, he has a few, we'd say, flaws as such, or foibles, but his main one is jealousy. Okay, and that's where we get the famous quotation and description. Okay, so it is a metaphor: the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. So that particular quotation is taken from Othello, the play by Shakespeare. Okay, so the play itself then was first performed in 1607. And basically then we have the tragedy of Othello. So the tragedy, of course, means that we have the inevitable death of Othello at the very end of the play. So it shows, of course, a dark tale then of how Othello, who is a proud and accomplished man, is undermined by this fatal flaw. Okay, so the setting itself then is Venice. Okay, we have two, we'd say, locations essentially in the play. We have Venice for Act 1, and then the action moves to Cyprus for the remainder of the play. So Venice itself, going back then to the 1600s, was a separate state, essentially. Okay, so remember that Italy was carved up into a number of states at that particular time. Some of them republics, some of them kingdoms. So you'd have the Republic of Venice, Republic of Florence. For example, in the south, then you would have the Kingdom of Naples. Okay, so we can see then that as a separate state, Othello then, of course, is appointed the general of the Venetian fleet, the army as such, and he goes to fight the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, because they, of course, are trying to seize control of Cyprus. So we see, of course, how he defeats them, and then it focuses more on the personal relationships then between Othello and Iago, Othello and Cassio, Othello and Desdemona throughout the play. Okay, so we have two basic settings then, Venice and Cyprus. Okay, so if we're focusing on Othello himself then, obviously the protagonist and the tragic hero. We see from the very beginning that he is an outsider, okay, which means, of course, therefore, that he is easy to exploit and easy to manipulate. So we can see how Iago, the villain, then manipulates and persuades Othello throughout the play. Okay, in what way is he an outsider? First of all, he is from Morocco. So he is the Moor of Venice, okay, or simply referred to as the Moorish prince. So Morocco then, where is it? It's in the northwest of Africa. So if you think of sort of Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, those particular countries are in the north, along with Eritrea, Mozambique, and so on. Okay, so it's the idea then that when he comes to Venice, he doesn't really understand all of the traditions, all of the customs, all of the nuances of Venetian culture. So think about it, people then can lie to him. Okay, then there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lack of communication then when it comes to his outsider status. Okay, so basically then he is Moroccan. The second point then would be, of course, obviously that he is an experienced soldier or general. That's why he's appointed as head of the army in the first place. So he is, of course, an older gentleman as well. So it's revealed in the play that he's aged 40. Okay, so we can see then, of course, that this is going to cause some consternation. It's going to cause a lot of anxiety then when it comes to the relationship between Othello and a Venetian woman. Okay, so it's the fact essentially that he is an outsider in terms of his background and in terms of course, the fact that he's an older man who is there in a relationship with a younger woman. And it's the fact, of course, that he is black as well. So racism is a very particular theme or concept or issue, essentially, in this particular play. Okay, so like I said, he's unfamiliar then with Venetian customs. He feels kind of out of place and a bit unsettled as well because of his background, because of the fact that he's a foreigner, and because, of course, he is black. Okay, so it's emphasizing the idea then that you have Othello as a black man who's in a relationship with a white woman, Desdemona. And then this causes, of course, quite a lot of friction and tension and conflict then from the very beginning of the play, as we'll see tomorrow then when we're reading Act 1, Scene 1. Okay, so we see, of course, that he's respected for his career. He's respected for his conduct, okay? But there is obviously this tension, in a sense, where he's not accepted for essentially who he is rather than what he is. Okay, so if we're looking at sort of like, we'd say positive characteristics, negative characteristics. So positive characteristics would be that he's very intelligent, he's well-travelled, he's very articulate, he can express himself. He's also very accomplished, okay, so he has done a lot with his life, experienced quite a lot, and he's also very brave. Okay, so all of those are positive traits or characteristics. On the negative side then, of course, we do see the jealousy. Where does the jealousy come from? Well, the jealousy comes from the fact, of course, that he feels insecure, perhaps, we'd say, a little bit out of place. So in a way then we can say that Othello is rather naive in the play. He trusts people too much. He listens to certain people and he should be more wary or more cautious of them. So we're going to use that word that we used in King Lear. We can see him as credulous. He believes and trusts too easily. And usually he's believing and trusting the wrong people. Okay, we can also see him, of course, as rather hot-headed. Another word for hot-headed could be rash or impetuous. So essentially, when he believes things, then he immediately, instinctively acts on what he believes without thinking it through, without using logic and reason, without kind of saying to himself, maybe I need to have another point of view or a different perspective here. Maybe I need to consider all of the aspects here before I just jump to a conclusion or make assumptions. Okay, so those would be the positive and negative traits that we try to sort of balance out essentially then as well. Okay, so the very beginning of the play, as we'll see then tomorrow, we have this clandestine or secretive relationship between the Moor of Venice, Othello, and Desdemona. Now, Desdemona is a Venetian woman, and as I've mentioned, she's younger than Othello, so she's only around 20. So think about that would cause, we'd say, a little bit of concern then when it comes to her parents. So remember that Othello is 40 and Desdemona is 20. And there's a sense, of course, that maybe there's a power imbalance when it comes to that particular relationship. And also think about the fact, of course, that he is kind of worldly wise, okay, that he's well travelled and very accomplished and he's done many things in his life. Whereas she, of course, has just simply been in Venice for her life. You know, she hasn't really done anything, she hasn't really achieved anything as such. So Desdemona, we can say, is well drawn to a certain degree, but we don't really get a sense that her character is well sort of fleshed out by Shakespeare. We see her as very kind and very gentle. Okay, we see her as very respectful. We see her as intelligent, but perhaps a little bit inexperienced and naive as well. Perhaps like Othello, she trusts too much. She trusts human nature too much as such. Okay, so we see, of course, or we hear about the fact that they've fallen in love and then they elope to get married at the very beginning, which suggests, of course, that they're well aware that people would frown upon their relationship, that people would disapprove of their marriage. So that's basically what we get at the very beginning of the play, where it's revealed that Desdemona and Othello have been in a secret relationship and that they are now getting married. They've eloped to do that. So we see that her father then, of course, is angered by this. He has respected Othello, but he doesn't necessarily want Othello as his son-in-law. So Desdemona's father then is the senator, a very well-respected man in Venice, and his name is Brabantio. Okay, so far we have Othello, Desdemona, and Brabantio. Now, moving on then to our villain. Okay, because think about it, Othello's the tragic hero. He's essentially decent, he has a fatal flaw. And then, of course, we have our villain, who is Iago. So Iago is actually introduced at the very beginning of the play. I mean, this is very typical of Shakespeare, where we don't get our first glimpse of the main character until maybe towards the end of the first scene, or maybe even the second or third scene. We've had that before, of course, when it came to King Lear, when it came to Hamlet, when it came to Macbeth. So Iago then, who is Iago? So Iago is a soldier. And we learn at the very beginning of the play that he's bitter and angry. He wanted to be promoted. He wanted to become lieutenant, not lieutenant. Now remember, the correct pronunciation is lieutenant. So he wanted to become Othello's second in command, like his right-hand man, because it's mentioned at the very beginning of the play that Iago is an ensign, essentially just carrying a flag into battle. So a lowly, ordinary soldier. So he wants more. He's quite ambitious. And we can see how ruthless he is as well, that he becomes very angry and very bitter and very resentful of the man who has become Othello's lieutenant, and he wants that position for himself. So he begins to plot and scheme against Othello because he's angry with him, and against then the man who became Othello's second in command, Michael Cassio. We'll learn more about him in a moment. So Iago is clever and he's ruthless, he's devious and he is treacherous, almost kind of negative traits. It's very difficult to come up with a positive trait that we could use when describing Iago, a very positive adjective as such. The most we could say, of course, is that he's highly intelligent and he understands human nature very well, and he's quite determined, I suppose, and sort of resilient. But he uses his intelligence and resilience then to undermine people. Okay, so he's motivated by anger and he's motivated by greed, a kind of lust for power, essentially. Okay, moving on then to Michael Cassio. And I've just told you that Michael Cassio then is Othello's lieutenant. So, like Othello, Michael Cassio is also an outsider in Venice, but he is just from another part of Italy. He's from Florence. And we can see that he is very cultured, very refined. He's also supposed to be very handsome and very charming, essentially. Okay, so he's seen then as quite charismatic. He's very popular with women, for example. So think about it. Iago is kind of depicted as just an ordinary soldier, kind of a plain, humdrum, nondescript sort of character as such, really, when it comes to Venice. And he is envious of Michael Cassio. So the jealousy is not just, of course, concerning Othello and Iago, or Othello and Desdemona. It's also concerning Iago and Michael Cassio. Okay, Michael Cassio then, of course, is used as a pawn in Iago's plot to undermine Othello. He pretends to Othello that Michael Cassio is having an affair with Desdemona. And of course, Othello believes him because Michael Cassio is younger and he's handsome, and he's also Italian. So it kind of makes sense to him then, of course, that Desdemona, if she were to be unfaithful, if she were to cheat, that she would be unfaithful with someone like Michael Cassio. Okay, some of the peripheral characters. So we'll meet Rodrigo at the very beginning of the play. Then tomorrow we have a conversation between Iago and Rodrigo. And Rodrigo is a wealthy gentleman, and that's very important that he has money, because we see Iago exploiting that. So the plot point is that Rodrigo is in love with Desdemona, or at least he is infatuated with Desdemona, and he wants to marry her, but obviously Othello is a stumbling block. So he asks Iago then to make sure that Othello is out of the picture so that he can marry Desdemona. And we find out at the beginning of the play that he's actually giving Iago a lot of money. So Iago is exploiting and manipulating Rodrigo so he can get the money, and then he pretends to him that he's doing his best then, of course, to ensure that Rodrigo marries Desdemona. Okay, so that's another complication. It's kind of like a subplot, essentially, when it comes to the play itself, but it is very important in terms of how it interacts then with the characters from the main plot, or how it kind of dovetails then, interlocks with the main plot itself. Okay, so we've mentioned Brabantio then, who is the father of Desdemona. We also have Emilia then, who is married to Iago, but it's not a very successful or happy marriage. We get the sense that Othello and Desdemona genuinely love each other, but when it comes to Iago and Emilia, they're constantly undermining each other, constantly sniping at each other. There's no sense of tenderness or affection there. We get the sense that Iago almost resents her, and we can see how brutal and violent he is then towards her at the very end of the play. Emilia then has an important role as such when it comes to the play, because she essentially then is the gentlewoman. So she then is Desdemona's assistant as such. So we see a strong bond and friendship then between Desdemona and Emilia. And then there's supposed to be a strong friendship between Iago and Othello. But we see the friendship between Emilia and Desdemona as genuine and sincere, and then the friendship, of course, between Iago and Othello is simply undermined by greed and by resentment. Okay, a final character then that we'll have a quick look at is Bianca, and Bianca is a courtesan, and a courtesan is just simply a euphemism then for a prostitute. Okay, and we can see how she is involved with Michael Cassio. So you can see already that the plot itself is quite complex and quite convoluted, and that we have lots of different friendships and lots of different, we say, relationships as such, and how they're all kind of interacting with one another. And then how we have Iago right in the middle. He's almost like essentially the spider then, who's trying to lure the flies into his trap so he can devour them. So we can see then how treacherous and how deceitful he is throughout the play, and how his plan unfolds then, how he is trying to undermine Othello, Desdemona, Michael Cassio, even Emilia and Rodrigo as well. So that's focusing then, of course, on essentially the tragic hero, looking quickly at the two different settings, so Venice and Cyprus, and then the main and peripheral characters in the play itself. So it'd be a good idea for you just to simply draw out a basic plan then on a page of the main characters and just jot down their names. And remember, if you find the spellings difficult, go to your Shakespeare app and you have everything there. Now you should be able to find the individual scenes on Google anyway. They should come up on a very basic Google search, but you're better off just downloading that free Shakespeare app. So you have the 4 different plays there, and at any given moment then you can have a quick look at a scene from Macbeth or a scene from King Lear or Othello, whatever it happens to be, and you can practice reading it and maybe thinking about how you would interpret and how you would analyse it then. because that's really what you need to focus on when it comes to the summer assessment. Right, guys. So make sure, of course, that I'm able to call the roll. So you need to indicate that you are here, of course, by writing here simply in the comments underneath the video, or you can email me tomorrow morning. I'll send a little message with this particular link anyway. So I'll see you back here then on Thursday. And remember, we're focusing on Act 1, Scene 1 of Othello. See you then.